I just want to share really where we're up to in terms of thinking what God's doing. This obviously began as it began within Greater Manchester. I was surprised. I think we're all quite surprised by the engagement with the subject, and then the engagement with the wider context of the churches and also the city. It just seemed to have something of it. When we shared this with you guys about 3 weeks ago, we were also, I think, encouraged by the response coming from a number of cities, forerunner cities, as I call you. And I suppose what we're trying to discern really is what God is actually doing through this. And I sense that he's creating a movement. I think that's what he's doing. And I think this is more than a network, and I think it's more than a model. Let me just underline that really, why I think that. Firstly, I think that because of the national stage this will take. The recovery is going to be part and parcel of the conversation of our country coming up for the next 4 or 5 years, easily. Once we've got over the summer party, and there will be, I'm sure, a summer party happening, we will go into autumn, and the sheer volume of the issues will become very, very apparent. The unemployment figures, the business closures, responding, as we know, to the mental health challenges, to the poverty issues, the inequality issues, and so on. And the recovery language and the recovery and the renewal language is going to be taking more and more precedence in national media and also within your localities, within your cities. So there is a sense in which starting a movement for recovery is entering a bit of the national stage. By having 3 mayors involved in this conversation, with Marvin, with Andy, and with Sadiq, already you are going onto a national level in a way in which we haven't really done before, which is why I think this is more about a movement than I think it is just about a network. I think there's a greater vision to this. I think it's wider and larger than we have tended to operate in as unity movements. There is a responsibility, I think, that we have for one another, towards one another, that has national implications. So if, we need to, I think, take up our responsibility together to walk together a bit stronger. One thing that you operate against in your city is parochialism, isn't it? One church or charity basically saying, I'm going to do what I want to do, and so on. You operate against that. You don't want that to happen, because we are wider than that. We're bigger than that. We are the one body in this city. I think the same value applies nationally as well. So I think there's a sense of responsibility we have towards each other. And there's a relational connectivity we also have to have towards each other on a national context. And then, of course, there is a spiritual empowering, please God, that, he would come with his grace, because this will only be done by his grace. So I think it's about a movement, and it's more than a network, and it's more than just getting a latest model. I think this is something spiritual. Thanks, Kay. Yeah, press the button. That'd be great. I suppose what I want to underline is what we don't want is probably for you to get started and never hear from you again. I can't control that, and you'll do what you want to do, but we don't want that. We don't want you going off and doing your own thing without ever checking back, and we certainly don't want any of us to deviate from the values and the vision. If we stand together as a movement for recovery, and some of you are going to want to take on that branding very directly, which is fine. Some of you will be operating within your own branding. So for instance, Compassionate Cities within Bath. But even if you could make it very clear that you're part of a movement for recovery, if you wish to, then I think what we're beginning to do then is getting a national connectivity. Personally, I don't operate very well with brands and everyone wanting to be part of the same thing, because I tend to operate more towards the individuality of a place. I understand that Manchester is very different, as I said, to Bath and Bristol and Reading and so on. I understand that every borough in Manchester is different as well. But there comes a time every now and then when you actually have to stand together. And I think this is that moment. And I think what we're looking for is a commitment to meeting regularly, and whether that's whatever rhythm that is. But we have at least 2 or 3 of your leaders on a call so that we are able to learn from each other. We're able to share best practice as we have been doing today. That there is a commitment to pray for each other. And I think there's going to be a real challenge here around prayer and developing a prayer strategy together. And I think this is really important, is there's a commitment to best practice, sharing stories and our needs. So, you know, on Facebook, whether it's WhatsApp, certainly on the website, we need to be seen to be, well, the true story of what we're doing needs to be told. That's the reality of this. This isn't about making up stories. There is already a cracking story in each of your cities, and there are numbers of stories in each of your cities. It's about elevating those stories onto a national context, so that when we have a call with Sadiq and with Andy and with Marvin, there is a strength of story behind that call, which therefore goes into the national context. I am terribly aware, I'm sure you are, locally, people know that it is the church that they often turn to. If they want food, if they want some help, if they want help with their kids, if their elderly parents are needing connection, it is often the local church that they turn to. Locally, that is the case. But across the whole city, that isn't always the narrative. And across the nation, that certainly isn't the narrative. And I think this is about changing that narrative and the church taking its place in society and being seen for what it actually does. And therefore then the releasing particularly of funds and commissioning can actually then begin to happen better. So it's a bit of a challenge to us, and you may not want to be part of that. That's fine, but I think we're taking a bit of a step up here, and it's more than a network, and it's certainly more than a model. This is about walking together spiritually. I was reading today from Ezekiel 47 and the water flowing from the temple, and that fantastic passage of, you know, the water coming and bringing life, and the life feeds the trees, and the trees are there with the fruit for the healing of the nations. And I was really struck by it again. I just sense God wants to bring a river of life to our nation at the moment, and the connectivity of that river. It's better if it's one river, isn't it? It just is stronger if it's one river rather than hundreds of rivulets. Is that the word? Anyway, smaller rivers, streams. That's a better word. It's stronger if we can stand together. As we know locally, I think it's stronger if we can do that nationally as well. So just some thoughts really around creating a movement. I think it'd be really good if we can just go into a Q&A session, and then we would love to spend some time in groups praying for each other. And I think we're going to go into random groups to do that. But let's joined here. We've got Dave on the line. We've got Ian and Andy Frost here as well. So just questions that you may have, that'd be great. Probably just chip in, I think, because I can't see everybody on my screen. So.
This is Tolu from Jesus House in London.
Hello, welcome.
Hi, quick question. That picture you just painted about, you know, having like a river flowing through. Does that represent? Is that represented by the sort of logo that was on the presentations that we just saw? There was a sort of a big yellow arrow with some smaller arrows beside it.
Yeah, thank you. I think it is, Tula. I think that sense really from God's house, the life comes from the presence of God. The life comes and brings life into the city and into the surrounding area. It's taken up, of course, in other passages as well, particularly within Jeremiah, where, you know, if you bless the city, I will bless you. If it prospers, you will prosper. And that sense really of the water of life coming into the city and bringing life.
Lovely. Thank you very much for that.
Roger, talking about branding, and we've been seeing the Movement for Recovery brand here. Can we just think who owns that brand and who can use it and in what context?
Thank you, Peter. We should have you on the leadership team, really. You're asking all the questions we need to ask. Essentially, it is there for to be used, I think, for cities who are saying we would like to set up a movement for recovery or be associated with a movement for recovery. I'm aware, Peter, you know, within your own branding of compassionate communities, but is there a way that, you know, you can in a sense join and be part of this as well? That would be my
absolutely. We could turn Movement for Recovery into the top brand, and then ourselves as the church network and the council all belong to it.
Yeah.
And that's a model, but there might be other models that work in different cities, but there will be a big benefit if we can all use the same brand. If we're talking about national awareness, even though where it fits locally, it may be different, but we do need to share what are the values that are associated with it, so that that brand remains something that has the values of us as Christians associated with it, wherever it is.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. That's very helpful. And we're also, I think, going to offer to...
Can you send us the logo?
Yeah, we can do that. I think if you guys are saying you want to be part of this, we can send you those resources. Absolutely.
Roger, should we put together an MOU for the logo? So there's an MOU you sign just as some understanding of what the values are. People both parties can sign off on, that'd be helpful.
Yeah, I think sometimes just setting expectations is really helpful, Andy. Yeah.
No MOU, yeah.
Just clarifying expectations, I think, would be helpful.
Roger, there's some interesting questions in the chat about other people to have involved in the national recognition. So the government minister for faith sits within the MHCLG, and it's Lord Stephen Greenhalgh. So maybe there's something to have a conversation with him. I know with Citizens UK, we're in complete touch with Lord Best, who again would be quite an interesting person perhaps to bring into the equation. But somebody has also put into chat the really interesting report that was commissioned by the APPG on faith engagement, written by Professor Chris Baker, who was, Chris was at Chester, but is now in Goldsmiths, fantastic Christian theologian and an author. And it's really important. It's in the chat. So if you'd like to just download that, it's definitely worth reading, because it basically makes the argument for Movement for Recovery. So yeah, really vital that we get a hold of that. So maybe even connection with the APPG, that's the All Parliamentary Party Group on faith.
Great.
All Party Parliamentary Group, sorry, get it right.
Fantastic, thank you, Ian. That's helpful.
Nigel's got his hand up, Rog.
Yeah, can I just ask, in Manchester, I know that, for example, you've got some quite large projects like the Message Trust and Redeeming Our Communities. How do they relate to this? How do you relate to each other?
Yeah, they're part of the network of networks, Nigel. So the Message Trust have been involved in the steering group from the beginning. We're not asking anyone to stop what they're doing. In fact, we're asking them to do more. But there does need to be an ongoing conversation around strategy and coordination, obviously. But no, absolutely, everyone's got to be part of it, Nigel. I think if it feels like it's just one person's thing or one group's thing, it won't work. It needs to feel our thing.
Yeah. Good.
Just off the back of that, I was just wondering about nationally with the Church of England and the Methodist, is there kind of ownership at the higher level? Because as a network of churches, of 70 plus churches in our city, obviously kind of there's some denominations that kind of get their instructions from up above. So it's quite useful to know what ownership there is at that higher level.
Great. Let's connect. Andy, you were talking with the Catholic Archbishop, I think.
The Cardinal and the Archbishop of the Coptic Church and the Bishop of London all on the call last week hearing about this. So they are aware this is happening now, in particularly London contacts. But there is some work to do there nationally to get some commendations from those senior people. Actually give their backing for it nationally is a good idea. So I think we should work on that and try to get some commendations from, the different denominational streams.
And we're looking to get commendation from the churches together as well across England. So that would be important for us. Does that help, Sean?
Yeah, thanks.
Roger, I was just about to exactly that. You popped down. Hiya.
Hiya, can't hear you,
I
mate.
was just about to ask exactly the same question. That say you said it's not top down, and oh, hang on.
He's in the countryside in Wirral.
Are we there? Yeah.
Yeah, I think so, Phil. Go for it quick.
Okay, sorry about that. Just to say, I was about to ask the same question as Sion. You said it's not top down, and of course we get that. But little Phil Dixon in the back of beyond in Wirral, it's that constant struggle of encouraging, mobilising, and motivating churches and church leaders. That's working well, but it's a big ask sometimes, you know. And it will be really, really valuable to have that kind of support from a denominational head kind of perspective, and see that kind of coming down from there, so that when we have conversations with ministers and regional leads, they're already, you know, if this is a godly move, which we believe it is, then, you know, we should be confident that we'll be seeing that support at kind of national denominational heads level. I would hope, you know, with the Archbishop, and I know Andy Glover's here, kind of caliber and strategic position. I think that needs to be very, very that's an important step for us to have that support, and it'd be good if we can confirm that in some way, Rog.
Yeah, we're continuing to work on that, Phil. Great.
I think that also applies regionally. There'll be regional leads and regional heads, and that will be good for a city region or Cheshire, etc. That would be very valuable to have that support at that level.
Yeah, I agree as well. I mean, you guys are going to have to work on your own connections locally, obviously.
Could I ask about the geographies within cities in terms of boroughs and councils, and how far, say, Manchester and London and some of the other bigger cities, working on this network of networks, how far, how did you go about getting sort of contact on the ground more geographically, as much as in these other spheres?
Roger, should I cover that one?
Yeah, please. You and Dave cover that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Paul, it's the fact that, you know, we have got borough connectors. I mean, that's what part of our team is, to have people who will actually bring the locality into a regional conversation. We know that we have to do this as GM because it makes sense to do so, but every single one of our boroughs has got its own identity, has got its own way of doing things. And so from that point of view, we need the borough connectors to be doing that sort of role. So whichever way you do it, you need to have people at that sort of level. I mean, within one borough, you need to have ward connectors in that sense, because that's how you're going to then get the strong engagement with the councillors who sit on the council, et cetera, et cetera. So from that point of view, it's always about making sure the team grows across all of that sort of infrastructure.
What's your context, Paul?
Leeds. And it's sort of different councils, really. Yeah,
it's a big city, so yeah. I mean, what we found within Manchester, Greater Manchester, Salford already worked together well, and Bolton worked together very well, but some of the other boroughs didn't. And what it's done is it's created unity movements within some new boroughs now.
Right.
So Wigan, for instance, was pretty divided. It had 3 Church of England dioceses in one borough. And but actually they've really begun to pull it together in Wigan, so that's a good sign.
That's good. Yeah.
Alan, Reading.
Yeah, Rog, just on that thing about different local authorities, you know, we span Reading, Wokingham, West Berks, and a bit of South Oxfordshire as well. So, you know, we're called Transform Reading, but we have that dynamic, and we are beginning to think about whether actually we can help catalyze some action across local authorities who don't often talk to each other, actually, in some cases are very antithetical to each other, by putting on a themed conference, for instance, around, you know, children's mental health and well-being, one of the big issues, and try to act as a bringer of unity in that sphere.
That's really interesting, Alan. I think as we get into this, we're going to discover new things God wants to do. Fantastic. Simon from Nottingham. Good to see you, Simon. I'm seeing.
Hi. No, likewise. Yeah. Just it's been really good connecting with people in Nottingham, but we're kind of almost, we're not really Nottingham. We're a small town outside, and just one of the things I want to think about is how do smaller towns, which are pretty autonomous, fit in with that, because we've got a good close-knit group of church leaders and we'd be well up for this, but we don't really fit into that citywide model.
What council are you under, Simon?
Ashfield District Council, and then we've got an Ashfield Faith Action Network group, which is pretty good.
Right. And then Ashfield is part of a bigger thing in Nottingham, is it, or not?
Yeah, I mean, basically Ashfield's it's about eight sort of old mining towns they put together in an area in Nottinghamshire that they didn't really know what to do with. So it's supposed to be one of the most deprived areas in the country because of the pit closures. So it's a very, very needy area, and it's always kind of overshadowed by the city. And just one of the things I'm concerned about is with this, that actually, again, we can feel we're overshadowed by everything with city planning locally here.
Yeah, I think for this to be effective longer term, it's going to have to operate at all levels, Simon. It's going to have to operate at your local small town level. It's going to have to operate at that wider district level, and it's going to have to operate at the Nottingham City Council level. And what you'll find is that some great stuff happening at your local level will be able to then influence the city level. Certainly within Trafford, where I work, the response to the recovery process in a small area, in Partington, which is by far the most deprived area really in Trafford, is leading the way actually, and it now influencing how other people in Trafford are doing their work.
Thank you.
Yeah. Great. David from Bath.
Yes, thank you. A couple of connecting issues really. Not a lot of mention today about connecting with the business world. I wonder if there are examples. And the other one would be education and probably higher education and further education. It's simply because they have huge opportunities for delivering messages to a large number of people in the education world. And just an issue with business, for example, Bath usually has 4 million visitors a year because of what it is. Obviously greatly reduced in 2020, and that is an economic disaster for Bath. So recovery is important.
I think you're right. Anyone want to speak to that? David King from say something around spheres.
I think the different sectors, if you take GM, we've talked about one sector today, with being talking with your council, etc. That's the starting point. As soon as you talk with your council, then you automatically talk with an element of the education sector, because there's a lot of the schools are council-based schools, unless they're free schools, etc. And then it's developing out. So if you take an area in Greater Manchester like Bolton, they have a business sphere, they already have an education sphere, health sphere, etc. It's looking at those things, but the civic is probably the starting point to build on from over time.
And of course, Bristol have a number of different spheres, don't you guys?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Is Tulu got a hand up?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
I just wanted to find out, in all the plans that you have outlined, is there any part of it that will be looking at impact assessments of what the body will be doing, and recording that so that everybody is aware of that from the very beginning and they're taking that on board as they go along?
Yes, Tulu. I think the whole thing around monitoring is crucial, and there's a lot of expertise in many of our cities because they're used to this on a regular basis. But we are also talking with a potential funder actually on monitoring to be able to help us develop something going forward. So, but there will be some experienced charities in your London borough, particularly where monitoring will just be part and parcel of what they do. So We need to learn those skills, and I think particularly individual churches need to learn those skills.
Yeah.
Could I just ask a quick question?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, thanks, Roger. I'm really excited by the vision for this. It was just a question really around how you see this working. It does work, but how do you see it working within sort of in devolved administration areas? I'm thinking specifically for somewhere like Wales, where we need to take a bilingual approach, especially with some of the branding. And I guess movement for recovery isn't just an England thing, but how can we sort of make it work, I guess, in those devolved areas, really?
Yeah, a good question, Tim. And we don't know the answer to that, but we are aware that this has the potential of going to the 4 nations, but it also has the potential of going across Europe. And there's a conversation now beginning with some of the unity movements across Europe, from Berlin and Oslo, and stuff developing in Brussels, in Netherlands, in France, because as you know, Europe is facing exactly the same issues as we're facing. And it was great to have Bernd from Frankfurt on the call today. And I think it's the vision and the values will, I think, actually remain the same, because I think they are applicable to Western Europe context. They're less applicable. Movement Day, of course, connects right across the globe. They're less applicable to Africa and India because they're in constant recovery all the time. And you know, COVID to them really is just another crisis. So it's, you know, it's less applicable to them. Probably it has some application, we think, into North America as well, and we're talking with the North Americans about that. But that sense really of crisis, that sense of challenge, that sense of you know, the greatest challenge since the end of the Second World War, and that unites us in that. So how it will be expressed will be very different. So, you know, in Wales, then they'll want to express that in 2 languages. I would have thought France and Germany will probably want to do their own languages and not English. But anyway, we'll wait and find out, and so on. So yeah, you're right, Tim. I think it has the potential of expanding. So we'll see what God wants to do.